And what that means is we've got to be able to identify teachers who are doing well, teachers who are not doing well. We've got to give them the support and the training to do well. And ultimately, if some teachers aren't doing a good job, they've got to go.
You mentioned dropout factories. One of the other things you'd like to do is you'd like to identify the lowest performing 5% of schools in this country and either close them down or in some cases turn them over to charter operators.
Right.
That would increase the number of charter schools in this country enormously. It could double the number. Are you worried that by expanding that program so rapidly you would dilute some quality in charter schools?
Well, look, charter schools are not a panacea. In fact, one of the things when you're looking at school reform is it turns out there are no silver bullets here. Reform is hard, it's systematic, it takes time, but we know that there are some charters who have figured out how to do a very good job in the lowest income schools with the kids who are 2-3 grade levels behind, and yet they can achieve 95% graduation rates, boost reading scores and math scores very high. What we've got to do is to look at the success of these schools, find out how do we duplicate them, and make sure that we are still holding charter schools accountable the same way we are all the schools. We shouldn't say just because a school is a charter that it's an excellent school, because there's some actually very poor performing charters. But what I'm interested in, what my Secretary of Education are interested in, is fostering these laboratories of excellence where we start learning, you know what, if it turns out if we lengthen the school day here, or we give them a little more homework there, or we're setting aside time for professional development for teachers here, or we're building a culture of excellence among kids at that school, that works. And once we find out something works, then we want to import that to every school, not just into charter schools.
In that documentary, I'm not shilling the documentary, by the way. I just think that people are going to be talking about it, so I want to bring some things up. They talk about the lack of choice that people, you mentioned charter schools in those very bad neighborhoods, the lack of choice that people in our poorest neighborhoods have. If they live in an area where there's an underperforming school and yet there's a great charter school, the number of applicants for a few positions at that charter school can be enormous. And so what happens by law is the kids are put into a lottery, and literally and figuratively their future is based on the roll of a dice or their name being drawn out of a hat. It's a bit of a disgrace, isn't it?
It's heartbreaking. And when you see these parents in the film, you are reminded that I don't care what people's income levels are. Their stake in their kids, they're wanting desperately to make sure their kids are able to succeed, is so powerful. And it's obviously difficult to watch, to see these kids who know that this school is going to give them a better chance, that should depend on the bounce of a ball. And so our goal is to make all schools high quality schools, make every classroom one where if a kid is showing up, taking their responsibility seriously, doing what they're supposed to do, that they can succeed. They're going to be able to read, they're going to have high math scores. It's going to take some time, but what we've now learned is there are schools that can work, even in the toughest circumstances. And once we know that, then it's inexcusable that we don't try to make sure that every school is performing at that same level.
Since we brought up the subject of parents, we asked some of our viewers to give us some email questions for us. We had Bethany Lutwin in Nortwin, Ohio, who wrote us this. I'm a middle school teacher in Cleveland. One of our biggest concerns in education is the fact that parents are rarely held accountable for their children's education. The blame for failing test scores always falls on the teacher. The responsibility of education should be shared by teachers, administrators, and parents. Why doesn't anyone ever hold parents accountable?
Well, I have to say, there has not been a speech I've made about education over the last 5 years in which I haven't said the exact same thing. I mean, at some level, no matter how good the teacher, if the kid's coming home from school and the parents aren't checking to see if they do their homework or watch TV, that's going to be a problem. And that's, by the way, true here in this White House. I mean, Malia and Sasha are great kids and great students, but if you gave them a choice, they'd be happy to sit in front of the TV all night long, every night. At some point, you have to say, your job right now, kid, is to learn. And I'm going to check with your teachers, and I'm going to make sure that you're doing your homework, and you're not doing anything else until you've done your homework. And that kind of attitude, I think, makes a huge difference at every level. And one thing I want to point out, Matt, there's no doubt that the schools in the toughest neighborhoods and the poorest neighborhoods are oftentimes the ones that are poorest performing. They are in crisis. But one of the things that everybody needs to understand is that across the board, in middle-class suburbs, in schools that are considered actually pretty good, you are still seeing a decline in terms of math and science performance. And one of the things that we are very excited about, because we need to focus on math and science, my administration is announcing that we are going to specifically focus on training 10,000 new math and science teachers. We've got to boost performance in that area. We used to rank at the top. We are now 21st in science, 25th in math. That is a sign of long-term decline that has to be reversed. And so we're going to be putting a big emphasis on math and science education, and part of that means getting better teachers, but part of it also means parents understanding their kids need to excel in those subjects in particular.
Here's another question. We can probably get through this one pretty quickly. You're going to make a lot of friends or a lot of enemies here. Mr. Cohn's 6th grade class, Roll Hill School, Cincinnati. President Obama, we understand there are discussions regarding the idea of attending school year-round. Do you think we should attend school year-round? If so, why?
I think we should have longer school years. We now have our kids go to school about a month less than most other advanced countries, and that month makes a difference. It means that kids are losing a lot of what they learned during the school year during the summer. It's especially severe for poorer kids who may not be seeing as many books in their house during the summers, aren't getting supplemental educational activities. So the idea of a longer school year, I think, makes sense. Now, that's going to cost some money. So here's an example of where you've got a good idea of reform, make sure our kids are in school longer. Well, that means the school is open. It means you got to pay teachers, custodial staff, etc. But I think that would be money well spent.
Got a young lady by the name of Kelly Burnett back up in New York in our Learning Plaza. She's from Nassau County, Florida, and I believe she has a question for you. Kelly, good morning. What's your question for President Obama?
Good morning. Thank you for taking my question, President Obama. As a father of two very delightful and seemingly very bright daughters, I wanted to know whether or not you think that that Malia and Sasha would get the same high-quality, rigorous education in a D.C. public school as compared to their very elite private academy that they're attending now.
Well, thanks for the question, Kelly, and I'll be blunt with you. The answer is no right now. The D.C. public school systems are struggling. Now, they have made some important strides over the last several years to move in the direction of reform.
Right.
There are some terrific individual schools in the D.C. system, and that's true, by the way, in every city across the country. In my hometown of Chicago, there are some great public schools that are on par with any private school in the country. But it goes to the point Matt and I were talking about earlier. A lot of times you've got to test in, or it's a lottery pick for you to be able to get into those schools. And so those options are not available for enough children. I'll be very honest with you. Given my position, if I wanted to find a great public school for Malia and Sasha to be in, we could probably maneuver to do it. But the broader problem is for a mom or a dad who are working hard but don't have a bunch of connections, don't have a lot of choice in terms of where they live.
Right.
They should be getting the same quality education for their kids as anybody else. And we don't have that yet.
Kelly, thank you very much for your question. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you.
One more on education, then I'll move briefly onto some news of the day. How do you inspire those teachers you talked about, the ones that are so important? How do you inspire a young college student right now who's considering going into teaching, who sees budgets being slashed, layoffs, sees those teachers having to dip in their own pocketbook to pay for classroom supplies, and now sees new pressure to get their kids to perform in a system that a lot of people think is broken? How do you inspire the next generation of teachers?
Well, first of all, there is nothing more important than teaching. I genuinely believe this. And I don't know a teacher who can't look back and say, you know what, here are so many lives that I've touched, so many people who I've had influence over, and each of us have memories of some great teacher who steered us in the right direction. What I want to also do, though, is make sure that if they go into teaching, they can stay into teaching, they can afford